What you'll see in this video was supposed to be a straightforward paint job, but it turned into a really frustrating experience. The final result did turn out really great, but how I got there was not fun at all. So here I am to share the story of how a tiny iron warrior almost broke me even after 20 years of painting experience. I love the new Mark VI Horse Heresy minis, and I also love the Iron Warrior's painting scheme. Such a great contrast, and how weird is this look on something like a Space Marine. And since a lot of you asked me how to do metallics in my grimdark style, I thought this was a great opportunity to combine all of these factors. I didn't want to just paint the model out of the box, so I did a little kit bashing to make it more interesting. I wanted to have as much clean area to work with as possible, so I got rid of the skulls and the laurels on the chest and made sure all the surfaces were smooth. One thing I did before I started working on these was to order a few bits, because I really didn't feel like 3D printing parts this time. So I ordered shoulder pads and these Iron Warrior Mark VI heads, but shortly after ordering them I got a notification that Games Workshop cannot send the heads and never will. Here's your money back. Well, we're off to a good start, but that was not gonna be the biggest source of frustration here. Only the beginning. So I grabbed this Mark III box and took one of the helmets, and that would have looked alright, I guess, especially since Iron Warriors like these Mark III suits, but I wanted to only keep the visor looking part and put it on a naked head. For that I had to hollow the visor and had to make sure it fit with the rest of the parts on that Mark VI head. There's a couple of options for bionic limbs, especially in the 3D printing space, but I just grabbed this arm from the veteran kit simply because I'm lazy, and the clenched fist meant it would be a straightforward swap with the original hand on the chainsaw. Now when it comes to my grimdark style, I don't think it does apply directly to metallics, because if you start from brown and apply metallics on top of it, it might just look like brown paint that rubbed off of a metallic surface. And I don't think that's going to make for a good look, which means I had to tackle this a little different. But before we get to the painting segment, let me thank this video's sponsor. And don't click away yet if you value your health, because health starts with your diet. Don't we all have that same problem? Too much work, and then we want to paint minis, get that army done, and there's no time to get some proper nutrition. Well, HelloFresh is here to help you with that. And I know what you're thinking, this is just another sponsor that you don't believe in, but they give you money. But this is where you're completely wrong. We've been ordering with HelloFresh for years now, as you can see, and that's not even all the meal cards. There's 2 more binders where these came from. HelloFresh delivers high quality ingredients to your door, and all you have to do is cook them, following these simple meal cards. And especially ever since our son was born, this has been a real time saver. No lengthy grocery shopping, and the meals are prepared in next to no time. But not only does HelloFresh help you stress less about your food, the price per serving makes grocery shopping pale in comparison, especially with everything getting more expensive recently. And it definitely blows takeout or eating out of the water. And with my discount code, it's practically a steal. Check out the biggest menu yet with their 45+ dinner options and even more market items that suit any healthy lifestyle. The meals you can prepare look amazing and are super tasty. I really never want to go back to before I knew HelloFresh. And you know, they say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and I certainly agree. And when HelloFresh heard me say that, they were like, heck yeah. And now they're giving all subscribers free breakfast for life. That means you'll enjoy a totally free breakfast item with every single HelloFresh delivery if you're using my referrals. So click the link in the description or use my code and get free breakfast for life, 1 breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. So I primed the mini black and applied a solid layer of dark aluminium. And then I gave it a wash of diluted contrast paint. The idea here is to give the metallics some color depth, and blue is really great for that initial steel look. As always, I'm directing the pigments to stay in areas that I want shaded, like the lower parts of the shoulders, lower parts of the chest, and below the collar. Next I added some burnt umber ink that I heavily thinned down with contrast medium. And this is some real magic for metallics, a double whammy if you want. Because not only does it stain the metallics, and especially as it interacts with the blue, it creates an awesome shade, but this mix also dulls down the metallics a lot, and this is what makes metallics look great in my opinion. Because what that does is it creates a contrast between the matte surface and the shininess when we add back pure metallics. Here you can see exactly what I mean. I think this is the perfectly balanced base for steel armor, proper grimdark without looking too weathered. Just notice all the color nuances, like on the back of the feet, and the armor looks worn without looking like a rust bucket, unlike the look that, for example, streaking grind gives, and that's almost criminal how fast it is too. In the tradition of my grimdark marines, I wanted to do the first highlights with a sponge. So I started to dab on pure dark aluminium to build back some metallic shine. Remember, that's the contrast I'm looking for with metallics. Dull versus shiny, and not just dark versus light. Eventually I switched to a medium-sized dry brush just to see if I can create a similar effect to the sponge, and I would say I like it even better because the resulting chips look even more random in size and shape, and I can focus properly on edges if I want to. The principle, however, stays the same. I want to achieve some controlled randomness, as that's what looks the most credible. So all of this has been a breeze so far. Really quick, and the result looks great. And I hear you say, where is the frustration that you promised me when I clicked on this video? And let me tell you, up to this point I was really happy because it took about 20 minutes and I already saw the video title in front of me. This is how I painted an epic mini in under 40 minutes. But boy, was I gonna get hit by reality really hard here in a minute. I finished this step up by making some of the edges and higher up areas brighter by dabbing on white aluminium with a brush, covering less space than the layer before. And after that final highlight, I thought about what to do with the layers of paint that go over the metallics in the Iron Warrior scheme. And I didn't want to just sponge metallic chips over layers of black and yellow paint. I knew I wanted to keep the work I put into these metallics because they look really awesome and have them shine through below the chipped off paint. So I used the so-called hairspray technique for the weathering. Except we don't have to use hairspray anymore. Nowadays you can use chipping medium. But the principle stays the same. Applying the medium on top of the underpainted color will create a film that reactivates when it's getting wet. And any layer of paint that you apply on top of that will just flake off if you apply force. So I just hit the pauldrons, some panels on the jump pack, the left leg and the weapon casing with the chipping fluid. And then I masked off these areas so I wouldn't have any overspray from the airbrush and applied yellow and black in the respective areas. As a fun little experiment, I applied the paint by brush on some of these parts. Yellow on the jump pack and black on the chain sword and one of the shoulder guards. While the black was fine, mainly because it went on in
2 thin coats.
The yellow was a real pain. You know, yellow, that's the paint everybody hates. No coverage at all, not even after 4 coats, and even if you look closely at the panel I airbrushed, that also took a few layers, while the black covered almost instantly. And I think that's the key here. Thin layers of paint makes this effect work. Just watch how I put some water on the paint layers on the chainsword and the shoulder guard, and with only a bit of scrubbing with the swab, it came off instantly. This means I had a lot of control since I didn't have to press hard, and I really liked the results. On the yellow, however, I had to really start scraping and even switch to metal tools so I would make a dent. But on the parts I painted by brush, not even that was working properly. Everything just felt gunked up and covered in too many layers of paint. And then ultimately, the inevitable happened. I had to press so hard, the whole layer of paint came off of the surface. And I guess that can be a cool situational effect, but here it was not the desired result. On the bright side, this also meant I could get rid of the layer as a whole without any damage to the metallic layer below, but man, what a waste of time. So I knew I had to switch strategy here, and I went for what I knew worked in the past. And so I painted the panels on the jump pack black, and the yellow parts I sprayed white first before I covered them in a thin layer of Imperial Fist contrast paint, just like I did for my grimdark Imperial Fist Space Marine. This turned out to be really cool in multiple ways because it allowed me to create more than just one great effect. The paint flaked off properly when I used the wet cotton swab, and I also could just use my needle to create finer scratches without much effort. But then another cool way to make the paint look weathered and beaten up is to scrub ever so slightly over the layer of contrast paint, which does reactivate with water. This way I could modulate the opacity of the yellow over the white, or even create flaked off paint that exposes the white completely. And this looked really amazing. It creates an extra layer of complexity in the paint job, which you can't quite achieve with just sponge chipping. Needless to say, my spirit was high. This finally started to look on par with the complexity of the metallics. But then, I realized one thing. Funny enough, I never painted hazard stripes on anything that wasn't a straight surface, and I'll admit it almost drove me nuts. I cut down masking tape to an appropriate thickness and applied the strips one by one. But on a cylindrical shape, once it wraps around the whole circumference, good luck making that work, unless you're doing a spiral. I thought it was going to be easier on the shoulder, but nope. The stripes just ended up changing thickness with the curvature of the shape. And someone that isn't as crazy in the head as me might not have a problem with that, but it drove me mad. You just can't get a straight strip of masking tape to bend around these curved and tapering shapes properly, and I even thought about sculpting lines with black masking goo. And I might have spent an hour or two trying to make it work. and I might have failed horribly, but I still have some dignity left, and I'm going to spare you the visual evidence of this travesty. Ultimately, I don't remember how much time I spent on this, but my small brain just couldn't figure out the solution. I was almost going to give up at this point, but then I figured I could just have the stripes cover the front half of the cylinder and it would work. But that still left me with the pauldron problem. Ultimately, I decided to go with something I saw in an Iron Warriors artwork a while ago, where some of the hazard stripes were painted on incompletely on most panels, so that's what I went for. Problem solved instantly. I just masked off the yellow accordingly, airbrushed on the black stripes, and then scrubbed off the rest of the yellow layer. Last but not least, the unstable nature of contrast paint, when confronted with its mortal enemy water, allowed me to flake off some of the black hazard stripes for a cool effect with no effort. So that's what I did until I was happy with the amount of weathering, and then finally added a chapter symbol on the left pauldron. At this point, the yellow still looked a bit flat, so I carefully glazed on layers of burnt sienna ink, which results in an awesome shade of orange. I could even create some subtle streaking effects by running the tip of the brush downward while the ink layers were still wet. And I also gave the black parts a few layers, just to build variety, as I did not bother to highlight the black, because at the core of this paint job was still the idea of speed and using the techniques as effectively as possible. One thing I thought about was to darken the edges of the armor like I did with my other grimdark marines, and I think you could do that carefully, but I just prefer the contrast the really shiny metallic edges give. I think ultimately I would reserve the darkened edges for something like a dreadnought or any bigger vehicle. I went for a rather pale skin on the face, painting the final highlights with a slightly blue highlight color so it would contrast against the mostly warm overall tone of the rest of the Mini. And I also had some fun with a small OSL effect on the chest panel of the armor. I knew I wanted to do the base in mostly reddish Martian dust tones. So I built the blue-green base on the rocks for a bit of color contrast and highlighted them beige, and with the same bluish color I used for the face as the last highlight. And then I dumped a bunch of Terra Herculano pigment on the base, making sure it stays mostly in the recesses, and finally also covered the feet in a bit of dust, just to make sure the Mini looked part of the scene. As a final step, I cleaned off some of the pigment from the edges on the stone and the armor with isopropyl alcohol, just making sure I don't touch them a lot, because if you go too crazy with this, you also rub off the paint eventually. And then I called this bad boy done. So I have a lot of mixed feelings with this. The grimdark approach for the armor worked really well and it was super fast, but the momentum completely vanished when I hit the problem with the chipping medium in combination with yellow. And at that point I could have just gone for the quick solution and some sponge chipping, but you know that this channel is about experimenting and taking any hardship as a sign from the God Emperor to try harder and make your vision work. Also, I'm a stubborn bastard. And again, as so many times before, I ended up learning a few new tricks, which is always fun. And it's great to see that even after 20 years of painting, there's still things to discover and room to grow. Thanks a lot to my patrons and channel members. You are the people making these videos possible. If you enjoyed the video, why not watch one of these other ones on screen? Maybe that one from my Grimdark series. Thanks for watching, keep pushing that pigment, and until next time,